Morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Trevor Watkins. I'm the Global Head of Sports at Pinson Masons, an international law firm, and previously used to be chairman of AFC Bournemouth. And with some good friends here on the panel, we're going to be having a look at US influence on the growth of soccer and finance. I'm delighted we've actually got an excellent panel, so hopefully a lot more people will be coming into the room. To my far left, Carl Charters from Inner Circle Sports, an organisation that has advised on multiple deals across many sports, particularly in the US and in Europe. Eric Eisner, family who own Portsmouth Football Club, one of the most iconic brands in English football. Bob Funk, one of the co-owners of Oklahoma City Energy, a USL soccer team. Another good friend, Nigel Travis, known across many businesses, but in this context, here as owner of Leyton Orient Football Club, now in League 2 of the English Football League. And both gentlemen, particularly Eric and Nigel, their teams have games tomorrow. So we just touched on the fact that Carl, unfortunately, is the odd one out at the end. The other four of us have all either owned or run a professional soccer team. Eric, Bob, Nigel, so let me start with Eric. Why ever did you think to go and invest in an English soccer team?
So it was a long process. First and foremost, we're a content company, and sports is the last kind of not on demand that you have to go see. So we kind of looked at that, and we looked at what the global game was. Football is that global game. And then we started looking around different leagues. We looked in the MLS, we looked overseas, we looked at the top of the Premier League, we looked at the bottom, we looked at it all everywhere, and we found in Portsmouth a club that had all the bones to be one of the great clubs in England again, but just had fallen on hard times. So we found an opportunity then to build it, not from the bottom, but from a place of instability from previous owners, to bring it back hopefully to the highest levels.
And you've been there how many years now?
This will be our third year of owning the team.
And in that time, I mean, it's come from...
Well, the interesting thing is that it went into bankruptcy and we bought it off the fans. So we literally bought the team off 3,000 people. And so they really had to buy into a long-term vision. And in English football, that's almost an oxymoron in that everything is day by day. So we have what we call a 50-year plan, and we want to redevelop everything from the academy to the stadium to the first team to the under-23 squad properly, but it takes a long period of time. So we're in the process, I'd say, the bottom of the first inning of our overall plan.
Just to give a little bit more context, this was a team that was in the Premier League within the last decade or so.
This is a team that has won championships in the golden years, which won the FA Cup, which even, as you say, was in the highest flight a couple years ago, and they did a direct fall all the way down because the owner's assets were frozen, and they just did a straight fall all the way down.
And then went to fan ownership.
And ownership. In League 2, we picked them up. They did an amazing job of stabilizing the team and stabilizing everything, and laid a great groundwork for a partnership that we can bring it forward.
Thanks, Bob. Oklahoma, obviously a very different location, not in the English League, no promotion and relegation we'll come back to. Why?
I've been in the sports and entertainment business for going on almost 20 years, and I've operated teams in other sports and other leagues, hockey, baseball, and there was a real opportunity in 2010 that I started seeing as I worked on another project with ESPN. I started to see a lot of the programming begin to pick up in terms of soccer on the ESPN related entities, and started to take a hard look at it. We were divesting out of baseball at that point. We were still involved in hockey, but I was looking for something that was going to be unique and different. And I had been a fan of the game growing up, and as time went by, I'd kind of walked away from it. And so it was refreshing to pick up and see the steam that it was gaining in the United States through the MLS and the national teams. So we began to have conversations with the USL. Saw that they were, we also, our main core business is in the staffing as a franchisor. And so we started our business in Oklahoma City and have franchises all across the country. So I've seen models that, if they're started off in the right way, they can really become something of value. And so from a business standpoint, I really saw something that was unique, that you could take advantage of the opportunity. At the same time, I had a potential partner in Tim McLaughlin, who was a fan and supporter of the youth game in Oklahoma and Oklahoma City. And so we were able to kind of come together in partnership and really take a stance of trying to unify the soccer community in Oklahoma City through the team. It's kind of been our mentality and the notion, one of our core values. And so it has proven fruitful, and we've been, we're just excited about the growth of the game. I really believe soccer is going to be the future here in the United States as it continues to grow and mature. May not be maturing probably at as rate as most of us would like to see, but I think that slow growth is probably important for it to stay rooted and to be able to continue to grow and sustain itself in the near term.
So 4,500 average crowd you were telling us earlier?
Yeah, about 4,500 average attendance. We are in a transition point now in Oklahoma City in and of itself, and actually waiting December 10th on a citywide vote to begin the funding of a stadium through the city. We are unique in Oklahoma City in that we pass a 1-cent sales tax every 8 years called the MAPS programs, and it goes towards infrastructure funding for different programs. And so that cycle has ended as of last year, and now we're getting ready to vote and approve the next cycle of 8 years. And the beginnings of a large-scale stadium, phase 1, are included in this MAPS program. So we're pretty excited about the opportunity over the next 3 to 4 years to build and transition into a new stadium.
I think that'd be music to Eric and Nigel selling my ears of a local authority paying for a stadium. You try that one in England. Be very unsuccessful. Nigel, I mean, if one was to look at your business career with Dunking and Abercrombie, Office Depot, et cetera, people would probably say, why on earth is a Brit living in Massachusetts going and buying Leyton Orient? I mean, I'm not sure people will know exactly, hopefully a lot will know what Leyton Orient is, but perhaps you could explain.
Sure. Simple reason, Trevor. I first went to Leyton Orient 60 years last month.
This is East End of London, yeah?
East End of London. And the way it works in England, for those who don't know, in the playground, you kind of fight over which team you support. So we're surrounded by West Ham, Arsenal, Tottenham, and a few other teams in a county called Essex, like Southend and Colchester. I went to my first Leyton Orient game, can even remember the attendance, played Sunderland, and that was it. The love affair started, and I basically followed it for the 60 years, and then the guy I went to school with, who's very well known, called Barry Hearn, owned the club. He sold it to a crazy Italian, who I won't name because I have to put money in a pot. And it was a dreadful regime for 3 years of terror. And the club basically nearly went bankrupt. We went down 2 leagues. We went from the verge of the championship, which is the second league down. So we were in the third league, League One, which is where Eric's Portsmouth are now. We went down to 2, and then to the National League, which is actually called non-league football. So I was on the verge of retiring as CEO of Dunkin'. I'm still chairman, and someone had to save the club. So I'm the fan who came along. We put a consortium together. I was supported very much by a gentleman out of Texas called Kent Teague, and we bought it 2.5 years ago. And I have to say, despite all the ups and downs, it's been terrific fun.
And as a fan running your own team?
Yeah, and actually someone asked me a question earlier on. Am I more fanatical or less? I think I'm actually less fanatical. But no, it's been a great experience, and I have to say, anyone who's willing to lose a bit of money and have fun at the same time, which is true, investing in what is effectively a minor league baseball team in a very competitive situation, I think is terrific, and we're working our way to a sustainable business model. I think Eric's a little further ahead, but no, I love it and encourage people to try it if they got the fortitude.
I mean, Kyle, You live and breathe this, and I know we've worked on a number of joint projects. Is there a tendency for your clients to come along and say, we'd like to lose a bit of money, shall we invest in soccer? Or are you seeing a different type of investor these days?
I was going to say Nigel's transparency exceeds what we typically get. But I mean, if you think about it, what Eric said was spot on, where he said we're a content business. And if you look at the values of team franchises, both in the US and Europe over the last 10 to 15 years, they're generally growing at 10 to 12% annually, if you use Forbes as a proxy. So if you put that up against the value of media rights, those charts actually look almost identical. So I think to me the question is, it's not, is the value of sports content still going to grow? Because it is. But is the value of sports content not at the top division, but at League One and League Two and USL, and minor league baseball and lacrosse and these kind of tier 2 layers of content, is that going to grow and monetize? And I think if that does, investors like Nigel, hopefully not much longer, will have to say we're having fun and we're losing a little bit of money, and it'll be we're having fun and we're profitable.
I mean, it's interesting, Carl, just for a second. I mean, these three guys have done their deals and funded them themselves. Are you seeing any difference in the nature of investors coming into the US market, into the European market? Are you seeing private equity? Are you seeing a lot more debt-funded deals? Well, what are you seeing out there?
It's changing in Europe. So if you're familiar, in the US, the big 4 leagues have what's called a league-wide credit facility. Bob and I were talking about that before, where if you're an NBA team and you want to invest in your arena, or you have strategic initiatives and you don't want to have a capital call, you can draw from these facilities. And it's very cheap bank financing, backed by the league's media rights. That doesn't exist in Europe. So what we've actually seen quietly kind of over the last year or two is US team owners and family offices and institutions starting to lend to European clubs. I mean, we worked with Fortress on the financing they did with Bordeaux and GACP, and that's actually becoming more and more common, which is interesting because hopefully, again, it gives clubs a little bit more of a long-term sustainable financing option, right?
I mean, tomorrow, for example, there's a full league program in England. I mean, Eric, you can watch Portsmouth?
We will be watching at 10 o'clock in the morning on iFollow, streaming. They stream internationally every game. You can't stream domestically in England the 3 o'clock games, but they are now allowing you to do the Tuesday evening games. So there's been a big uptick in the revenue that comes from the domestic subscribers. And as we all talked about, and you just talked about, the OTT plus the Sky deals and all that, with those OTT platforms extending to the world, and obviously the bigger clubs will reap the benefits now, but over the long run, I think you'll see that will be a real revenue driver where everybody can see the games.
I mean, Nigel, when I was chairman of Bournemouth, and obviously your position at Orient, it was all about terrestrial television, broadcast rights. Is that the future?
No, I don't think it is the future. I think streaming is the future. I mean, I'm on several boards, and let me just share with you the numbers in the pizza industry. The people who order pizza, 77% do it on their phone, 20% do it on a laptop or equivalent, 2% do it on their tablet. Now, that tells you that mobile is the future. There's 5.28 billion smartphone subscribers in the world. I think this is a huge, huge opportunity. I think the Football League have not done a particularly good job. I think iFollow is a huge progression on what we saw in the National League. But at the moment, they've got a digital rights issue with mobile phones, which if you're outside the direct platform, you can't use it. And we think this is a huge upside. But I think the short-term goal is a club like ours, our average attendance is nearly 6,000. I want to get, in the next 2 or 3 years, us having more subscribers through streaming than come to the games. I think that's the goal. But I think when you think about everything that Bob said about how soccer is growing and what a great game, and how some other games are declining, places like China, India, you name it, I think there is a huge opportunity to get people identifying with a English team, and they will choose it the same way that I chose Leyton Orient. One day they will watch a game and decide that's their team. It's the playground selection process, and it may be a great club like Portsmouth, which is a great club, or it may be a smaller club in the heartland of London. We call it real football in the capital. And it's interesting, Trevor, we've managed to get people moving from the Premier League clubs because a lot of fans find the hassle of going to a big stadium, getting in, and the segregation and all that stuff.
And the price?
Yeah, and the price, yeah, big issue. And they can come to our ground. And again, the analogy is AAA to the major leagues.
So Bob, what about you? What your investment strategy? How do you get your media rights sorted out to make sure your club is going forward within the USL? Is it similar to these guys?
It's a little bit different. We rely on the USL for a lot of the negotiation, the opportunity there, especially on the streaming side. I look at it a little bit differently because it's so nascent here, and in terms of the media rights, you've got, the MLS really controls that portion of it. We have a great relationship with ESPN. For me, the way I look at it is how are we as a league, because we've grown so quickly, going from 14 teams when I came in to right at 36 at this point. It's how do we differentiate ourselves? I mean, if I want people to watch us, especially stream our games, how are we going to make ourselves different? How are we going to take our product and make it different and or comparable to MLS or any of the European leagues? Because just as you want people to be coming to you from all over the world, I want the same thing. But it's got to be a different product. So that's one of the large conversations that's going on within the ownership group for our. And in order to get a return on our investment, is we need to make ourselves different, not to necessarily compete in a Division I, Division II sense, in that area. But how do we make our product completely different than the other products that exist out there to attract more of those customers? And so we're at a really unique and I think interesting and kind of fun time, is that we get to be a little bit more creative. We get to be a little more cutting edge as a league and as ownership groups, and we get to try a lot of things. One of the best examples is in League One is Forward Madison. It's a small club, but they have a fantastic social media program and following, and their marketing, outside of, I would obviously say, the energy, their marketing and the things that they do are second to none. They're pretty incredible for a small club, what they do and how they're attracting people across all their platforms. Incredible.
Can I expand on something Nigel said? This panel is the U.S. investment in overseas. iFollow, which is New Lion, is actually owned by Endeavor, which is an American talent agency. So that just shows the scope of where I think American investment is not just going to clubs, but into the streaming technologies and stuff like that. So I think that's an interesting fact, is that Endeavor actually owns iFollow.
But for you, so I was going to say, for you guys though, one big difference: your media rights, your streaming, you're all looking to exploit that. No promotion and relegation here. But you can't sell your players. Correct. Necessarily, not the same way as Orient or Portsmouth. I mean, Carl, do those factors impact big time on the investors and where they'll look to put their money?
Yeah, I mean, big time's probably an understatement. And
an understatement.
Understatement. I mean, your risk profile is just totally different, right? There's a reason Major League Soccer teams, I have to be careful. There's a reason MLS teams trade for 5, 7, 9, 10 times revenue, and a Premier League team outside of the top 6 will trade for 1.5, 2 times revenue.
Can we just put that in context? That means you can buy a Premier League team.
Sorry. And
we do know you can buy a Premier League team. We won't say which one. For roughly speaking, about $200 million. How much would I have to pay for an MLS side? Roughly, if I was thinking about it.
350 to 500 is my guess. And so in a non-nerdy finance translation, that basically means the valuations of these clubs are pricing in the risk of relegation. That's the number one driver in valuation difference between the two. You have safety in the U.S. If I own the San Diego Padres in Major League Baseball, we have a terrible season. That's not really affecting the value of my club. But if Portsmouth goes up to the championship, then goes up to the Premier League, and then back down to the championship, like the value of your asset is changing pretty dramatically season to season.
That would be a heart-racing ride.
But okay, so for the guys that own the teams, if you could go out, if I gave you £400 million just now, and you could go out and buy a Premier League club for $200 million, pounds, and a alternative would be to buy an MLS side, what would you do? Or have I got the wrong question? You do something else. What would you do, Nigel?
Well, okay, so
as a businessman,
you got to remember, despite the fact I'm an American citizen as well as British, I'm firstly a Brit and I grew up with English football. The MLS model, to me, I just don't like it. I mean, the absence of promotion and relegation, I don't think of it as a real league. I know that's an outrageous statement to make, but...
I mean, you make more outrageous. Soccerex will love it more.
But I really think the only way this country is really going to get on the map and have a national team is to have competitive soccer. And if you take Eric's league, League One, I actually looked the penultimate week of the season last year, 11 teams, with one game to go, could have gone down out of League One.
Yep.
Every game means something. Now, it is a different system here. I support the Red Sox. We were out of contention probably in June. I support the Miami Dolphins. Tanking is a very weird concept, but anyway. We were out all season. That doesn't happen over there. Now, is our model right? No. I mean, the risk profile that Carl talked about is unacceptable, and we've said to the league, and it needs to be changes. I mean, they've got to change some of the taboos. Like, one taboo that I think America really leads is artificial pitches. I mean, I coach in the US, and we play on some fantastic artificial pitches. It is a nonsense. Our stadiums are used, 35 times a year? So you've got an asset that's not being used. Clubs are losing money, as per what Carl said. 75% of the clubs in the EFL lose money. We have to change that. And I think the sad demise of a club called Bury, and there's rumors of another club going out of business as we sit here, is going to bring change. And I think that change will move us from attempting to get to sustainability to profitability, but it's going to require change. So, yeah, I don't like the MLS model. I think they have to find a way of changing it.
To promotion and relegation?
Yeah, I mean, because I think it will make it more competitive. I mean, I live near the New England Revolution, run by my good friend Jonathan Kraft. I think, well, perhaps I'll go. No, I won't. It's only when I get to the playoffs I think about going.
Because it's competitive.
Because I'm a casual fan. Okay. Does it mean something then?
Bob, is your league competitive, or is it just like pre-season friendlies each week then?
No, no, we're very competitive, and I think he makes a great point in that the value of an MLS franchise. Yeah, I don't like some of the things about the way they compete as well. I want them to be more competitive, and not just be dependent on the playoffs. I think there's a way to change that system. But the risk that you take at promotion relegation, I think there's a way to meld. There's got to be a way to meld two of those systems and be able to come up with a way that you can still have that in competitive environment, especially with the lower leagues, and start to play, whether it be interleague cups, however that may work, in order to start creating that competitive vibe between the divisions.
I think Trevor will know this. Cricket had the same problem.
Changed it,
and they moved it to two divisions. But exactly as you say, they then surrounded it with lots of other competitions.
Right, exactly. I think there's a way to do that, and to also help develop the media rights around that. That makes a lot of sense, so that everybody wins. And I think MLS benefits. Our league, I know, benefits. Will benefit from that, and valuations will continue to rise. Your last two words of your question were from a business sense. I mean, if I'm investing $400 million, I'm going to invest in an MLS team because I believe the appreciation rate on the value is going to be that much higher.
Why?
Strictly from a valuation.
Why do you think the value is going to go up?
Because I think the MLS is they're still expanding. They're going to shut off expansion at some point very soon. I would expect they say 30. I think it's more like 32. We haven't seen a professional league that hasn't more or less rested in that range here in the United States. I think it makes sense. You've got some of the largest media markets from an advertising perspective that are kind of on the table at this point. So I think there's a lot more value that's getting ready to be created through the expansion franchises and the ability. But once they shut that off, I mean, I think you expect an immediate 20 to 25% lift in valuation because of scarcity at that point. Now, they're expensive to operate, and they're not all making money. But over time, that you'll see that function shift. And for the markets that can't operate those teams effectively, there are other markets waiting in the wings to buy a team and move it into their market. So I think that will eventually, you'll see some equilibrium there where everybody gets lifted. And so if I'm investing at $400 million today, I'm going to buy an MLS team because I feel like it's going to be worth $550 to $600 probably within the next decade.
Eric, I mean, you and your family have got huge expertise in leisure, entertainment, sport. Is the US model, UK models, are they sustainable?
I think they're absolutely sustainable because of the content aspect. I think to go back to the seasons, I was so conditioned, I'm really into sports, the American sports, where the regular season, it's all about the playoffs. And then for now in English football, tomorrow every game matters. When you have the relegation promotion, it's really interesting that every Saturday is a really important game. It doesn't come down to seating placement and then you come in and play one game and anything can happen. That said, we see it as entertainment, unscripted entertainment that is provides for some of the best climatic action, and it's must-view in TV.
So Kyle, are we looking at the rise of soccer values, or are we looking at a rise and fall? Team values.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like I think Bob said at the beginning, I don't think anyone in this room would disagree that soccer as a game and as a sport and as a fan interest is only going up and to the right. I think the bigger question is, can we find, I think Nigel kind of alluded to it, is there some sort of middle ground where it marries the entertainment of the model in Europe, which is great, right? I mean, it's unique, relegation, promotion, every game matters, with kind of the economic viability of the big five leagues in the US. Because to me, I agree with Bob in that MLS valuations are going to continue to rise because you have safety and you have the rising value of content. And in Europe, team valuations will continue to kind of chug along unless there's a meaningful change in the economic model. That's
Can I just say,
personal view.
Personal view,
Yeah.
do you see a time come when a soccer team in the US trades for a higher value than a baseball, NHL, or NFL team?
Yes. It will happen.
100%.
100%?
Yeah, I mean,
Depends which league.
I'm biased and I love all sports, but this is a game that has so much drama in a short time. And that, you take golf. I mean, I used to play golf a lot. I haven't got time for 4 hours plus now. Most people are in that camp. Football is over, and soccer, whatever we want to call it,
Ball.
is over and done inside 2 hours. That is real entertainment. And I think all the US sports are trying very hard to speed it up. But I think we've got a wonderful package. And I think there's a consensus here that the model we have in Europe is broken in many ways and needs to be fixed. I mean, anyone can turn up to be an owner, which I think Eric and I would agree is nonsense.
The fit and proper test is not very stringent.
That's going to get changed. I mean, all silly things. We've got to attack the fact that you can't watch a game with alcohol. That's a historical issue.
So for those of you who do not come from England, because of various problems, basically if you want to have a glass of beer, you have to watch it from behind, you drink it behind a screen. You're not allowed to look at the pitch.
Exactly. And to us, that's probably worth £3,000 to £6,000 a game. So there's a lot of change needed, and I think we can learn a lot from the US. But I think Carl summed it up. This has to come together, and meetings like this are really good, because I think it's going to force change globally.
Conscious we're into the last 10 minutes. Nigel does have a board call. Let's say, are there any questions coming up at the moment? Because if we could see any questions, we'll happily take them. or just carry on chatting?
I would say it's impressive that people got here in Miami on Friday morning, so. It was a lot crowded before, but thank you for coming.
Question in the front row.
Can you talk a little bit about, so we talked about Premier League, etc., and ownership models there. Sorry. Thanks. We talked a lot about Premier League and ownership models. Can you talk a little bit about the 50+1, the German model, and how you think that compares with the English model and pros and cons around that?
So for people, anybody who doesn't know it, if you try and buy a club in Germany, there are bars on how much you can get in terms of shareholding, and you can't end up in a majority position. At least that's the theory. Carl, is that a major deterrent on investment? Is the Bundesliga falling behind because of it?
Yeah, this one hits home. So I spoke at a conference of German football owners last year and gave a talk about this concept of outside investment coming in the Bundesliga. And it was pretty binary. I had 2 or 3 people come up to me after and say, that was awesome, it's happening, we're with you. And I had 2 or 3 owners come up and basically tell me I need to leave the country and don't come back.
And you did.
You know, What's interesting though is that the German clubs are among the best run and probably the most fiscally sustainable of the 5 leagues in Europe. So I can't fault them in the sense that what they're doing is working.
Beautiful infrastructure, beautiful stadiums.
Yeah. It is inevitable, though. I think that they'll agree. Like, again, it's kind of similar to promotion relegation. I don't think it's going to be a black and white overnight change, but there will be modifications to 50+1 that will kind of slowly but surely start to open it up.
And it is one of the oddities in European football. You know, if you want to buy a club in the Netherlands, you can't own another team, which, as a lawyer, I'd probably say is antitrust and illegal. I just say, I did a speech last year and they said, what's going to come first, changing the 50+1 rule or Brexit? I was like, not quite sure what would happen first. Any other questions? Yeah. Question there's in the third row.
How does soccer not make the same mistake that NHL has made in America, where
what mistake has it made?
The mistake is that 78 to 80% of the teams are unprofitable, and you know the owners are reaching in their pocket deeply because it costs a lot more money to run those teams than it takes in Europe to run some of the soccer teams in Europe. So how, you know, their TV rights are ridiculously low. You know, football seems to dominate the TV rights, and I think when the renewal comes up, that'll change dramatically just because of the competitive nature of media today and the fragmentation of media today. So how do you prevent that so that you build a better model coming in than NHL has built, and how do you duplicate a new age model that has more streaming and or over set tops over the box and so on?
So if we were sitting there, guys, and we had a clean sheet of paper, what structure would we be putting in place to keep things sustainable?
Well, Jordan, thank you for the question, and he's run two NHL teams, so you know, I value his experience. I think I would say for a start, talking about England, which is where I'm really interested, change is about to come. There's a meeting next Thursday, which they stupidly put on Thanksgiving, and we've already...
Didn't know about you, Nigel, or Eric.
No, and it is ridiculous because we got, I can't remember how many US owners, but that shows how they need to think more broadly, to Jordan's point. But I truly think you have to get the right people in. We need to have a hard salary cap that you can't fiddle, manipulate, and things like Derby County selling their stadium and Aston Villa selling their stadium.
By the way, this is where the owners have sold the stadium that the teams play in to themselves to create a revenue figure that allows them to put it in the accounts, which then means they comply with the financial regulations. Some people would say that that's not fair.
No, yeah.
Or where's that effect?
Well, it isn't fair, but anyway. And I think, you know, as we've said, we all see the value of content. Carl pointed it out very strongly, as did Eric. I really think we're about to see change. I think next week's meeting, despite the date, is going to be significant because we've got new leadership at the Football League under Rick Parry, who effectively started the Premier League. Mm-hmm. He's going to be a wind of change. we as a club have submitted a paper, which you've got, and we've got to push this change. And you mentioned Brexit. The one thing I'm really worried about is Brexit, because football tends to rely on an owner and his business. A lot of businesses will get affected if Brexit happens. So I think we should be concerned about that. But the model has to be attacked, and they have to embrace a lot of US ideas that they don't right now.
If I could add something to that, I think in regards to the NHL, just my experience in running hockey teams is there's I think they lack a focus on simply the business. They really focused on the competitive side. They want to make the best hockey game in the world, and I get that and understand that. And I think that's an admirable goal, but they do it at the expense of the business model. So salary caps, the way they produce the games, the way they've approached some of the media. I mean, it's really hard to watch, and they've not solved that problem. There are a variety of factors that all point to they're just not focused on the business model. They're simply focused on the competition. And if they would switch that mentality, I think they would fare better.
You're 100% correct. In fact, so much so that the salary cap is out of whack to the revenue of the actual teams. That's number one. Number two, you've got to I would say, you got to overcharge for tickets to offset that revenue. Number three, your sponsorship revenue. You've got to have a ridiculous amount of sponsorship team there to bring in the sponsorship revenue you really need. One of our teams, we started at $4 million, we wound up at $32 million. So I think Nigel brings up some good points that many of you do today, that this is a new age, and you could build a better business model than it's been built before, but learn off of some of the mistakes that have been made and don't repeat those same mistakes. So
thank you.
Can I just add one thing to that?
All right, please.
Having worked for a hockey team as well, and as you say, they worked to perfect the game on the ice, but they didn't really embrace the marketing of the game. And I think that is something that ended up hurting them.
Was there one more question? Anybody else have a question?
One over here, Trevor, on the right.
Yes, Kyle, to your point about European team valuations being flat, I was wondering if you're seeing any movement on merging of leagues, especially cross-border, as a potential strategy to raise valuations.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. My best answer is we've had institutional investors, so think traditional kind of private equity type buyers, propose concepts like that, where we say, okay, could we, and we don't want to take on the risk of single club ownership, but could we go acquire a league and diversify across those teams and have the media rights and merge that with another league or another property? I mean, in a very different way, it's kind of what Endeavor did with UFC and with professional bull riding, where they took these kind of different sports assets and put them under one umbrella. It's really hard though, right? I mean, you've got a lot of conflicting interests and constituents in trying to do that. So I personally don't see that happening anytime soon, but it's been proposed.
This point in time, because I'm conscious, Nigel, you have got a call coming up. Just like to thank everybody for the questions that have been asked, but also to the panel, who I think, if you give them a big round of applause, there's a lot of insight. And if I speak on their behalf, I'm sure they'll be very happy to chat, apart from Nigel, who's got to dash off for a second and come back. Thank you all for coming. That's a wonderful session, and I'll hopefully see you again this time next year. Thank you.